What's up, YouTube? Welcome to the Counting Wisdom podcast. I had a thought on things that are beyond, stupidity or beyond, foolishness. In that, when you think about the concept of hell, it's so severe, that I don't think it really makes sense sometimes, even when as a Christian, we know the difference between right and wrong and things like that. Some things don't necessarily make sense. And so one of the things that, I can think of is, that when God made us, and for all the people that have been born, it seems like we have some sort of level of, smartness or understanding to a certain extent that God holds us accountable for, our inaction or inability to, do certain things. And so it seems to me that, you sort of have to be, beyond foolishness or beyond stupid to, go to hell, just because, it doesn't make sense for God to sort of hold us accountable, as severe as, sending someone to hell eternally, and I think these are things that are sort of beyond, some of our understanding. Just because, we could think of concepts of maybe sending someone to, hell or jail for like 100 years, or maybe like 1,000 years, or some sort of end to it, where they have some sort of rehabilitation or some sort of different level of punishment. But of course, this is coming from the standpoint of, a biblical understanding of, what the Bible teaches about eternal hell and eternal punishment. Now, there are a few different beliefs in regards to hell, but, strictly coming from the standpoint of, the concept of hell being eternal, or the lake of fire being eternal, and, you can never go out. When you think about it, it seems so extreme, and so sometimes it doesn't necessarily make sense, unless we think of it, from the standpoint of how people, when they do something wrong, they have some, more beyond basic understanding of, how wrong it is, which really gives us insight into maybe, the type of people that we are sort of dealing with, and especially when you get into maybe evangelism and our message that we are carrying to people, even though, the Bible says that we can't necessarily preach the gospel from a wisdom standpoint, like, trying to use maybe worldly wisdom or intellectual knowledge or something to convince someone, for example, coming from the standpoint of, something beyond, the preaching of how Jesus died on the cross for our sins and raised from the dead, and, the life of Jesus, and preaching that, instead of that, using some sort of, logic type of way to convince someone, the Bible says, that, takes the power out of the gospel. And so it seems to me, that sometimes when I think of hell and people going to hell, I feel bad for those people, and I don't think this conversation makes me feel a little bit less bad. But at the same time, some of this doesn't really make sense, and I think sometimes we are sort of thinking of people, maybe from that misunderstanding type of thinking, even when we analyze other people. One of the things that God says that, he says that he judges what's in people's hearts sometimes. Obviously he judges our actions too, but he gave us insight on how people, we judge by appearance. So sometimes if you see someone who maybe isn't dressed nice, you can sort of come up with your own conclusions about that person. If you see someone and they have maybe their YouTube video has books in the background, and it's kind of a clean, nice look. They have a bookcase, maybe they have the plant or something, and they seem to show that they have maybe even some money. We usually judge that person as, they must know what life is all about or something, or they must have some sort of advantage, or I should listen to that type of person. And so those are just some examples of how we judge by appearance. And I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about how I think those that do go to hell, it has to be a complete neglect of, I guess, a understanding and knowledge that God naturally gives all people. And, I don't know if it really makes sense sometimes, but, and I keep saying that, but, it seems to me that, why would God, have such a severe punishment, if people weren't smarter than what we attribute them, even, what we would call, maybe someone that doesn't necessarily have the appearance of, being, smart according to the world standards, and yet they do wrong and live wrong. Especially, when you think about some of the things that people have invented, and I think some of our inventions build off of other people's inventions over history, maybe. But still, when you look around and see, some of what's here on this earth, it doesn't really make sense how we have gotten, some of the things that we have created, from the basic elements of this earth. Like, there's trees, you see the dirt, you see the ground, you see the water, and, obviously there are, different types of rocks and metals. There's, oil in the ground, but yet, some of the things that we produce, like a phone and a television, or, a spaceship, it doesn't really make sense unless, people are smarter than even what we appear to be, and, at least from God's perspective, maybe not from our perspective, but for God to, judge someone so severely, it seems like God has some sort of understanding of, how, he has made people. And so he's saying, hey, I know that they understand, what to do and what not to do. And I know that they understand, the gospel of Jesus, or, I know that they understand, what I'm asking them to do, and yet they are not doing it. And so, it seems like that is where God is coming from. And, when a person dies, one of the parables that Jesus gave was how, a person, instantly goes to heaven or hell, or paradise, or, hell. And, it seems to be, kind of a done deal. That's the other crazy part about hell and the lake of fire, is that, it seems to me that, it's already a permanent type of thing. We know that sometimes in this world, you see some crazy different stories, on the news of like maybe a person who has spent, 20 years in prison, and then, new evidence comes up and now they're acquitted, but yet they already spent 20 years in prison, but yet, somehow some evidence shows that they weren't guilty, and, they get released from jail, but, they've already lost so many years of their life. And then, there's different stories along those lines, and yet, it seems like hell doesn't necessarily operate that way, where, God would be like, here, there's some new evidence that came up, or, I see that this person wants to turn over a new leaf, and so, hey, you don't have to stay in here for eternity, I'm going to take you out of here. And that's just not what, the Bible seems to talk about. Now, I do think that, there are some theories that we can sort of come up with, but it doesn't necessarily fall into, what the Bible reveals about this particular topic. Now, we do know that there is a great white throne judgment, and from our understanding of the Bible, that you have to, have your name written in the book of life, and that's only by putting your faith in Jesus Christ and only by believing. And so, it seems to be that, most of these things, are not going to necessarily change, even when, the people are standing at the great white throne judgment. Now, obviously we don't know all the details about the great white throne judgment. We don't know if people are going to be given a time to speak, or is it just going to be one-sided, where God is just sort of reading them their judgment, and like, hey, is God going to be giving them some sort of explanation, or does he not even give an explanation? When Jesus sort of gave the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, there did seem to be some sort of conversation, and it wasn't even with God, it was with Abraham, which, when the rich man was sort of giving some sort of conversation that he wanted to have, the rich man, the conversation that Jesus revealed, it didn't even show the rich man even trying to convince Abraham to let him out in a way. And maybe he was in a kind of a subtle way or something, but, the rich man didn't even, kind of refute, being in hell. He was just kind of like, hey, I'm going here. And so, I think that is another one of the answers when we think about, kind of a crazy topic like this, is that I think some people don't necessarily care, if they go to hell or not. I do hold the position that even for Christians, we shouldn't just assume that we're going to heaven. I do believe that, yes, we should have, a confidence, and, different things like that. But the Bible clearly says, some people should not necessarily, even in the Christian church, should not necessarily assume that they're going to heaven. And so that's what I try to preach, just because Jesus said, there will be those that say, didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't we cast out demons? And didn't we perform many miracles in your name? And then Jesus will say to them, away from me, I never knew you. And so, to me, one of the things that says is that, some people, should at least have some sort of thought of like, hey, I should analyze if I'm living this Jesus life right. Am I living correctly? And so that's what I kind of think in some cases, as Christians. But going back to, the whole concept of the lake of fire, I think that, some people just don't care, you see even in movies, and I don't know if I've really had, I've heard some everyday conversations. I know movies are a little bit different. They don't always reflect exactly what, a person would say in reality. But, even on the news, sometimes you hear people talk about hell in such a way where, they just don't care. And so I think that's a little bit of what's going on, is that, people kind of accept like, hey, I don't, want to stop doing what I know is wrong. I'm just going to, sort of pay for this later. And it's kind of, I think it could be in some ways related to kind of like credit card debt. Is like, so many of us, we can, get a credit card and we just keep getting new credit cards and racking up all this debt. And, saying like, hey, I'll just pay for it later. And, I've heard of some cases, and there's probably many that, some people never even pay off their debt. Some either declare bankruptcy and try to get it erased, but then also some people, leave some debt to their kids or to those that follow them. And they're like, they just die and like, hey, I'll just, leave this for someone else to figure out. And so, maybe that is sort of what's going on in regards to hell. That same type of concept is that, people are just like, hey, I'm going to do what I want now. I won't bother trying to change. I don't even want to change. And, I'll pay for this later, and I'll, suffer the consequences and, I don't care, basically. And so that's what, I think, we need to consider, especially as Christians, when we can sometimes feel sad, about, kind of the heaviness of heaven or hell, and really, sometimes when we think about, people going to hell, just because, we are people ourselves and, we ourselves don't want to go to hell. And, yeah, we don't necessarily know exactly how bad hell is. Of course, we assume a lot of things, but at the same time, when you talk about the concept of a lake of fire, and, when you hear, certain concepts from the Bible, like, going back to, again, the rich man and Lazarus, the rich man said, hey, I'm in agony in this fire. And so, of course, he was still able to talk in some way, so it seemed a little bit bearable, possibly, but at the same time, it wasn't. And so, I just think these are some things to consider when, as Christians, when we feel bad about hell. I think that, obviously, we still should have a place in our heart to, preach the gospel to the lost, but, is it possible that some people are, beyond stupid or beyond foolish in a way that they are going there just because, if it wasn't that, why would God hold someone accountable for maybe not understanding, what's going on, or if we sort of take what people say at face value of, hey, I don't believe there's a God, or I know there's a God, but, I'm just not sure. It doesn't make sense for God to, send someone to hell in the lake of fire for all of eternity, because we sort of think of it as, hey, maybe they just, need another chance, or, maybe they just don't understand something, or, kind of something like, imposing on, them some sort of disability or something, like some sort of, unfairness in regards to those that do go to hell and the lake of fire. And so I think, sometimes, when I think of hell and people going there, I think of it, kind of as a tragic, sad situation. But, I think, it is still sad and tragic. But I think when we think about it, maybe we can consider some of these, other points that, we should possibly consider in regards to, why God would seemingly, not, lessen, at least the time. Obviously some Christians, we do believe there's certain levels of punishment for someone that does go to hell. Maybe someone who, didn't necessarily murder anyone or, do some sexual immorality, but they just didn't believe in Jesus, and maybe they had some sort of lighter type of sin. We do sort of believe that there is a different type of punishment. They still go to the lake of fire and hell, but maybe they won't be in the same type of agony as, some other person. But, it's still a crazy concept. And so I think I'll leave the comments open for this particular podcast too. Do you think the concept of hell is pretty crazy? Obviously, some people don't necessarily believe in hell, but maybe I won't leave the comments up. I don't know. This is kind of a touchy topic, obviously. But anyway, thanks so much for checking out this podcast for those that did, and I will talk to you on the next one. See ya.